Okay, well, welcome back everybody. I'm going to be chairing this session, this afternoon session on map completeness and accuracy in historical GIS. We've got 4 speakers within this session. First of whom doesn't need any introduction, Noam Levin from the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. He's going to be talking on assessing thematic accuracy and completeness of historical maps.
Okay, thanks Ian. Okay, so let's get into this. Historical GIS enables us to, as you know, access maps and analyze them quantitatively for 2 purposes, or many purposes, but in this talk I'll talk about 2 purposes. One is to understand the people behind the map. Okay, what were their methods, intentions, the technologies they used. So that's one aspect we can use historical maps for. The other aspect in which I'm more interested is to use these historical maps to reconstruct past landscapes, so we can visualize them. And there's a very interesting project that was done by Eric Sanderson in New York, the Manhattan Project, where he took an 18th century map, a British map, of Manhattan Island, and he reconstructed the landscape as it was. And using virtual reality tools, you can now fly over Manhattan Island as it was in 17-something, and then it was called Manhattan, okay, the original Native American term for Manhattan. However, when we work with maps, we should always be aware that maps don't show us the world as it is. And as Mark Monmonier writes in his book, How to Lie with Maps, he starts his book with this sentence: not only is it easy to lie with maps, it is essential. Okay, so another writer tells us that the power of maps, the power that we give to maps, is that they we assume that they are objective. And when we read the map, and the map paper knows that we assume that it is an objective, that we assume it to be an objective presentation of reality. So a drawing is not a map because it's not it's not supposed to be objective. A map knows that we suppose its objectivity. However, it's not. And to avoid hiding critical information in a fog of detail, okay, to see the forest, okay, the map must offer a selective, incomplete view of reality. Okay, so the cartographer always has to use tools of simplification, generalization, selection, okay, choosing what to show, how to show, okay. So the map must tell white lies, and that is fine, okay. But it is very easy for a cartographer also to hide details, and we wouldn't be able to know that. So I'll be talking in this presentation about some aspects of selection in maps, in historical maps. And we want to try to assess how complete is the information shown on the map. How reliable is it? How reliable is it for reconstructing the past landscape? And there are various sources of uncertainty associated with every map, also with maps generated these days using the best technologies, and of course with historical maps. The same types of uncertainties are associated with maps. And I will use in this, during my presentation, the conceptual framework for uncertainty investigation in map-based land cover change modeling developed by Lake and his colleagues. And I'll give some examples from my own studies from maps of Israel. So this is the basic schema of uncertainty forms in maps in general. And I will give some examples of cross sections in this matrix. So we have production-oriented uncertainty related to the production of the map, the surveying process. Okay, how accurate was it? How did they identify landscape features? So that's one kind of uncertainty we have in historical maps. And another one is transformation-oriented uncertainty. And this is related to errors, spatial errors that are introduced into the map. It can be in the original survey process. Of course, it can also be during the georeferencing process of the map. So some more errors are maybe introduced into our GIS layers. And then we also have application-oriented uncertainty. And this is related to the kind of application that we will have, or the kind of views we will have, will apply on this map. For example, maybe a map will be good enough to show village names, but will not be good enough to show the extent of the built-up area. So for one use, the map will be accurate enough. For another use, it will not be accurate enough. So depending on the application. And then we have this different kinds of uncertainty. And I will go through them in some examples related to the, for example, the attribute of the features. How certain are we that this is really a forest? Okay, it is shown as a forest on the map, but was it really a forest back then? Okay, so different kinds of uncertainty, and also another example, semantic uncertainty. Maybe we have two maps, each showing a forest, but how was a forest defined? Okay, maybe the cartographers or surveyors in each map defined the forest in a different way. One defined the forest as trees above 5 meters high, and the other defined the forest as trees above 2 meters high. Okay, so, and usually we don't know this information beforehand. So let's go through some examples. Here we have a historical aerial photo. These are some coastal dunes in Israel near the past town of Majdal, okay, present-day Ashkelon. Historical aerial photo. So this is, we can say, objective, okay, picture of what was the landscape back then. And if we want to reconstruct the land cover back then, okay, we can say, okay, let's interpret this aerial photo. And what do we see here? We can see some agricultural plots. Okay, we don't know what kind of what was grown on them, but this is clearly agriculture. We can see a temporary winter pond, because this is in January 1945, which had also rainfall, so we have a temporary winter pond, and we have some dune areas. Now, if you study dunes, and I'm a geomorphologist also, you see these zebra stripes on these dunes. This is a very peculiar way that the dunes look like after rainfall. Some parts of the dunes are wet, and they look they're a bit darker. Some parts have already dried up. Okay, they are bright, so these are active dunes. However, these areas are not active dunes. We don't see the same kind of pattern on them, and we can see some lines in these dunes. We can also see some trees. However, the naive person that doesn't know about the kind of land use in this area would say, all these are sand dunes. We have agriculture here, and we have a winter pond in this area. Now let's look how this area is shown in different maps of about the same time. So a 1 to 10,000 British map of the same area. And we have, now all this is shown as orchards and vineyards. And there were vineyards and orchards, but it's not the same kind of orchard that we have in this area. Okay, the symbol on the map is almost identical. However, in reality, it looked totally different. Okay, so, and here I'm talking about attribute uncertainty. How certain are we that this area was indeed an orchard? Okay, it is shown in this map, for example, it's shown as figs and vines. This is shown as another kind of orchard. However, in another map, a 20,000 scale map, again, things look different. We can see the active dunes areas. And here another area, which is also in the aerial photo, we can say these are active dunes, but it is shown in a different symbol. So the same kind of landscape is shown by different symbols. We still have the winter pond. El Birke is the Arab name for, okay, we know brecha, okay, a pond in Hebrew. However, on 1 to 100,000 scale map, we don't see this as a winter pond anymore. So all these maps are from the same period of time, but they're using different symbology. And the same place may be shown is uncultivated in one map, a temporary winter pond in another map. And this area is shown here as an orchard. In this map, it is shown with dunes and some trees on them. So we have some uncertainty in defining what is the land cover type from historical maps. And we can quantify this. I don't have here the example, but we can create land cover maps from each map, from different scales. And tomorrow we'll do this in the hands-on exercise in Mount Scopus. We'll play with these maps exactly. And then we can quantify in each place in space how many times was it assigned to a certain land cover category. if every time it is assigned to the same land cover category, then we are quite certain that this area was indeed an orchard. But if in every historical map it is assigned to a different class, then we're not very certain, okay, what was there back then in the 1930s. So that's one kind of uncertainty. Another one is consistency. Again, it is a production-oriented uncertainty source. How consistent is a certain land cover shown throughout the map? Is a certain land cover shown using the same symbol throughout the map? On the left side, you can see an area. This is in the coastal plain of Israel. And this is an area of stabilized dunes. In the southern sheet, we can see a symbol of dunes. In the northern sheet, we can see a symbol of an open forest. And in reality, we have here ancient dunes covered by scattered trees. In one map, it is shown using this symbol, another map using another symbol. On the right hand, we have another example, the border between two sheets in the PEF map. Here we can see a scattered forest in the coastal plain, and here you can see cut down trees, the stumps. And this area was going through a process of deforestation in the 19th century. And we can see this process from the map, but the same kind of landscape, I assume that the landscape doesn't change along a linear line abruptly, is shown using different symbols. And this symbol, for example, is not shown in the legend of the map. In many cases, in historical maps, you have symbols that are shown on the map, but are not shown in the legend. So you need to have some understanding of what kind of land cover was there from other external sources. Another kind of uncertainty in historical maps is related to the positional accuracy. How accurate are the features that are shown on the map? How accurate are they in space? Was a certain well, is it shown in its real place, or is there some error in its location? And here I analyze the PEF maps for their positional uncertainty, the accuracy in their locations, and I check the locations of about 1,000 features in the map, comparing them to present-day topographical maps. I could identify that a certain well by its name is a certain well today or spring, and I checked whether the positional uncertainty is different between different features, different kinds of objects on the map. First of all, when we check their location, we can see that the entire PF map is shifted about 500 meters to the east on the east-west axis, and there's much less error in the north-south axis. And this is due to the harder, it was in past times, it was much harder to ascertain the longitude than it is to ascertain the latitude. Okay, until the 18th century, it was even very, nobody knew how to determine the longitude. And there's an excellent book by Sobel called Longitude, where you can read about this part of history. So we can see this shift, this east-west shift. Now, if we just look at the position accuracy of different features based on their classes, you can see that the kind of feature with the least error are the triangulation points, okay, that were used in the survey itself. Okay, so they had their baseline, they measured the azimuth, they constructed their triangulation network. So that's the best, these are, the error of these is about 50 to 70 meters, depending on which measure you use. And as this is an inch to the mile map, 1 millimeter is 63 meters, it is about 1 millimeter. So this is rather okay. However, other items, for example, where rivers meet, okay, it's not a junction, but where two rivers meet, these are mapped at lesser accuracy. So different objects are mapped at with different accuracies in historical maps. So we should also have this in mind. Another issue of uncertainty in historical maps is related to their completeness. Whether all the features that exist in the real world are shown on the map. And of course, we cannot show everything on a map because of its scale, for one thing. Here we can see 6 maps from different years, different scales, showing the same area. Okay, that's in the northern Negev. And I also analyzed some more maps of this type. And I took from these maps, I digitized the rivers, the network of the rivers. And you can see also that the river network is shown in totally different ways in different maps. Thanks. And the most detailed map, in fact, is from World War I. It is more detailed than present-day maps. They were much more interested in identifying all the rivers because they were now in the war, and they wanted to know how to move their troops. So they had much interest in mapping all the fine rivers. And we can see that there's a clear relationship between the scale of a map, each dot is a map, and the length of the river's network. And you can see the most detailed map is from 1919. Okay, much more detailed than the present. And we can also analyze the residuals from the regression line. And you can see that here we have the river's network length is much more than we would expect based on its scale. So apparently they were very interested in this, so they devoted much more effort to mapping it. And the last example I'll give to you is another study that we did about concerning with the wetlands along the coastal plain. We wanted to know how many wetlands were there in the 19th century along Israel's coastal plain. And we can see here two maps, a PF map and then a Turkish map, showing a different amount and number and size of wetlands. So how many wetlands were there? Okay. So if we examine the total number of water bodies, of wetlands, we can see that the PF map, that was the oldest one, mapped in this area maybe 80-something wetlands, whereas the British Mandate map from the 30s mapped only 10 wetlands. So this is related to scale, but not only to scale. Other things that may affect the number of wetlands in the area shown is, for example, rainfall. How much rainfall was there when the surveys were done? These are all temporary wetlands, most of them. It happens, and rainfall was measured in the old city of Jerusalem since 1845. So we can see the average rainfall in Jerusalem. And it so happens that during the PAF survey years, we had two very rainy years. So we can assume that there were many wetlands. Okay, so they, in fact, also saw many wetlands. Whereas during the 1930s, when the British topographical maps were done, these were dry years with much less rain than usual. So they also, I guess, saw less wetlands. So that's another thing we should check, depending on the kind of landscape feature we are interested in. And the last thing to show in this respect is how can we extrapolate beyond the maps. And here I adopted a methodology from ecological studies, which is called species accumulation curves. Assume that you are now trying to identify how many species of birds there are around us. Okay? If you will stand here for 10 minutes, we will see maybe 5 species. If we stand for half an hour, we'll see some more species. So the more time, the more sampling effort we invest, we will see more species. And you can see here how species accumulate as a function, for example, of the number of individual birds that you see. At the end, there won't be any increase in the end. So we can adopt this same method, and instead of individuals, each individual is a map source, and here we'll have the number of wetlands. And I divided the wetlands based on their area. And these are different extrapolation methods. And we can see that, and I had 16 historical maps showing the same area. And we can see that I'm quite definite that these historical maps show all the wetlands beyond that are larger than 100 hectares, 1 square kilometer. So I'm quite definite that all these wetlands are shown on the maps. However, the wetlands beyond that are larger than 1 hectare, we didn't reach saturation. Okay, there are probably some more wetlands that are not shown on the maps because they are too small in size. And we can try to estimate how many were there based on different extrapolation methods, and this is using a software which is available for free called Estimate S. So in conclusion, there are various types of uncertainty that can be identified on maps. And by quantifying map uncertainty, we can estimate how complete are the maps. We can try to extrapolate, how many features were there in the past beyond what is shown in the map. And then we can perform quantitative analysis of land cover changes, etc. So thanks very much for your attention.
Next speaker is going to be Gad Schaffer. He's a PhD student here at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, and he's going to be talking about reconstructing Palestine's land cover from the PEF map of 1880.
Okay. Okay, good afternoon. I'm going to talk to you about one part of my PhD research, which is the reconstruction of 19th century Palestine based on the PF map. So, as you see on the right, this is the PF map. The PF map, I will just give a short introduction to it. It was conducted between 1871 and 1877, and it was published in 1881. As you see, the map is from Beersheba to South Lebanon. However, my research was until the border here, the international border between Israel and Lebanon. This map is actually very valuable because, first of all, it was done before just at the start of the modernization, industrialization of Palestine, and also because it has landscape features of the past. In this scale, you cannot see, but we will see in a second. It has a lot of features such as wetlands, sand dunes, built areas also. This is the original PF legend. Oh, okay, so here we have, for example, just to give you a taste of how things have changed, we have here the PF map Caesarea area. This is the half circle is the walls of the old city of Caesarea. Here we have the river. We have also here a wood, a forest, an oak forest. And we can see, we can see today how it looks. This is a map of today. We have again this half circle, which is the city of Caesarea. We have the river. However, where we had the wood, we have here today a town with a lot of built area and agricultural land. The maps are also accompanied by 3 books, which are divided into regions, Judea, Samaria, and Galilee, and we use them as a reference because there is a lot of information about the landscape, about population, agriculture, historic sites, and other things like that. There is also a 4th book about the flora and fauna of Palestine. What were our research goals? One, it was to examine the completeness of information represented on the PF map. In other words, what we see on the PF map, does it actually, is it valid? Is it correct? Can we use it as a valid historic source, this map? Second goal was to quantitatively reconstruct 19th century Palestine landscape. And thirdly, it was to see whether the landscape patterns that we saw in 19th century by using the PF map can be explained by physical or human variables, meaning topography or where people lived. So the first thing, we wanted to reconstruct the PF map. What we did, we created a wider legend. This is the original legend. We created a wider legend. The reason is that, as Noam before showed, first of all, the PF map was done by different surveyors. Different surveyors drew the map a bit differently. In some categories, we weren't sure exactly to which category of the original ones they match. So we created a wider legend. Moreover, we created also a table. Each polygon that we drew when we digitized the map, I will show you in a second, we gave to each feature on the map a clarity identification, meaning how much are we sure that this feature is indeed, for example, a dense wood. If we were sure, we gave it number 1. If we were partially sure, we gave number 2, and if we were unsure about it, we gave it number 3. So how was the digitization done? For people who maybe are not don't know how is it done, here we have the PF map, the Jerusalem area. What we actually did, we drew the features. We created polygons. Each polygon got also a category. And to make it easier for us and also for you now to see what are the difference, we gave it a color. So all the built areas are in red. All the greens are orchards. All the purple are vineyards, and etc. Here I will give you an example of 6 features shown on the map. What actually you see here is 2 layers. You have the PF map below, and you have the color with the shape of the polygon is actually the digitized layer we did. So here you have palms, for example. They do look also like palms, I think. You have fir trees, you have dense wood, and sometimes they would also write which wood. Here you have oak forest, but sometimes they would write olive trees or other things. The bluish here is marshland. Here you have orchards. And here they look like orchards, but they are surrounded by a wall, and dotted lines, those are gardens. As I said previously, we also use some of the PF books because on the map, as you see, you have orchards, but you don't know. If you want to know a bit more about what are orchards, you can go back to the books. So here we have a sentence, for example, an orchard of figs, or an orchard of pear, pomegranate, and a good grove of olive trees. So if we wanted more details, the books are the place to search for them. The result. So this is actually the PF map digitized, the map. The red line is the research area. So this is what I actually digitized. As you can see, for example, from the map, all of this yellow color is sand dunes. Although here you have a lot of green, which are orchards. Here you have more brown shades, which are more natural features such as woods, scattered wood. And if you are more into numbers, so from this digitization of map, you can also extract numbers. So here are the numbers. Here you have some of the, not all, some of the landscape features. You have how much they are in square kilometers and percentage. We can see, for example, open space, 78% was open space. It's important to notice that on the map, all the white place was open space, which means it doesn't mean that it was empty, or maybe in this area of the desert it was empty, but most of the areas were maybe grazing land, or they were a bata area, and the surveyors didn't think that they are very important to mention on the map. So just to sum up here, if we add the scrub, the scattered wood, and the dense wood, there is about 13% of wooded area at the time, at the 19th century. So it's quite a large amount for this region. Lastly, as I told you, I measured, I gave every polygon I drew how much certain I was about the feature I saw. So as you see, most of the areas we were very certain about the feature. There were some places we were partially certain, and there were just a few places which we were uncertain what was the thing drawn on the map. The second goal was to actually see if the map is complete. The information inside it is complete, and the map is valid for a historical use. So what we decided is to compare the PF map to First World War photos. This is the sites, 16 sites chosen to be compared between. Those sites were chosen for 3 reasons. The first reason, they had a large variety of landscapes. The second reason, we wanted to cover all the the research area as much as possible. So we try to cover it from north to south, from east to west. And the third reason is that not all of Palestine at that time was covered from with aerial photos, and this is what we could find to compare the PF map to. So I will show you an example. Sorry. And before that, we also created this time a reduced legend, since on aerial photos you see the details very generally. You don't see like in map that you can add written things and draw. So we reduced the legend. And here is an example. For example, I took the PF map of the Jerusalem area, we digitized it, then we took the same aerial photo of Jerusalem, we rectified it to the same place, and we digitized it. As you see, you can see by yourself that there are changes. For example, the built area, the red. Here there were a few houses, and suddenly there is a spread of buildings. Here is another example of Ashdod. You can see, this is the PF map. You can see built area, orchards. The white with black dots are sand dunes, and winter ponds here and here. Then we digitized the same map. We took the same square. This is the same square of the PF map. And we took an aerial photo, the British one, from December 1917, and we digitized it. By having two digitized layers, what we can do is actually compare them, because they are quantitatively. And we compared all the categories of Ashdod by using the equation sum up difference to the one on the aerial. So we measured the difference between categories and also in total. So, and also you should also look that all the categories here are also found here. None of them are missing. And the difference, the total difference between the Ashdod PF map and Ashdod aerial photos is only 4.4%, which is very low, because you should bear in mind that there is a gap of about more than 40 years apart from those two photos. Here are the results of all the 16 sites. As you see, all of the sites, the difference was less than 40%. Moreover, we examined also the categories. So most of the places, if on the PF map we had wetlands, sand dunes, and built areas, we also found the same categories in the aerial photos. The four sites that some categories were missing, the main categories were wetlands, sand dunes, and winter ponds. And from other written resources, it's mostly due to human activity that they disappeared, those categories, those features. Lastly, what we did, we tried, after we had this GIS layer of the PF map, we tried to see if we put other GIS layers of different human and physical factors, do we see any special, maybe we can understand the distribution of the features in the 19th century. So we examined the PF map with, for example, distance from built areas, average rainfall, soil types, and topography. I will give you only one example of the result. Here we have distance. What we did, we took all the built areas on the PF map, and we measured different distances from built areas to see which landscape features can we can find. So this is the distances in kilometers, and if 0 is the built area, we can see that about up to 2 kilometers, we have mostly the green shades, which are orchards, gardens, vineyards, palms, which was also very rational to think that next to built areas we will have mostly those landscape features. And above 2 kilometers we have brown shades, which are more dense wood, scattered wood, and the furthest from built areas we can find sand dunes, wetlands, all kinds of features that people wouldn't choose to live next to them. For conclusion, first of all, by comparing the PF map to the aerial photos, we showed that the PF map is a valid historic source to describe the landscape of Palestine in the 19th century. By digitizing the PF map, we also showed that Palestine in the 19th century was not a deserted place, but had a variety of natural and human landscapes. We showed that part of the spatial distribution of 19th century landscape could be explained by physical and human factors. And lastly, this research created a database which will be available for further research and also for free to public in the next year or two. So that's all. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that.
Any question?
We've got time for a question too. Yeah.
How long time it took to digitize?
A year and a half. Yeah, it's every day, 5 days, 5 days a week.
Including coding or just digitizing?
No, that's digitizing. Yeah.
I wanted to ask you, you said that you compared the PF maps to the maps of World War I.
The aerial photos.
Which is not a normal period, first of all, but secondly, did you find any difference in the distribution of forests? Because we know that the Ottomans cut a lot of forests to use for the trains during the war and before the war.
Yeah, I couldn't find a lot. I tried to find aerial photos of areas like in the Sharon area to see if we can see those woods that appeared on the PF map. I couldn't find any source for trees, but some areas did look like they had some vegetation, maybe like an area of Bata or Gariga. So we could assume that there were some woods, but none.
So most of the forests really disappeared?
Yeah, they disappeared. And you cannot find them. Just traces of. What, sorry?
Even nothing with the magnificent.
No. Yes?
As a cross-reference, you can use the ground photographs which were taken by PEF either in the 1870s and later on in the approximately the First World War. So you can either see, even not from the air but from ground, to see if if there was a forest or there was
Yeah, there is. It's also a possibility. Another research to do. Okay.
I think it's important, and Noam showed it in his presentation, that some of the forest was cut a long time during the 1870s, during the time of the survey, and a long time before the World War. So it is very interesting that we will try to maybe reconsider the myth of the forest and cut for and by the Turks for the train, because maybe a lot of it was cut before. And the same thing was found in a seminar paper of one of my students 2 years ago. So I was very glad to see it on your presentation.
Okay.
Now we know, Buni, that the Ottomans issued a law against cutting the forests. They issued the forest law, and that some of it was cut for charcoal, not only for the steam mobile train.
Okay.
Yeah, if you cross-reference British textbooks, you'll see that where you have an orchard, you have somebody taxed for oranges, or if you have a vineyard, you have somebody taxed for grapes.
Okay, some of them.
That's the reason why the biggest variations between the wetlands, you said, and sand dunes, because those are places that are not taxed. So just like Noam showed that the World War I map had the most detail in rivers, because that's where I want information for deploying troops. The same thing in the PEF maps. When I want taxes, it's not important for me to know where I can't, squeeze any bets.
Okay.
But the British made a fiscal map in 1930, and then they copied again the orchards and all those things. The land was divided to a whole bunch of.
Okay.
You have the main village, and then you have Malkoot. And we have tax books. We use them until today in the West Bank.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much.
So our third speaker in this session is going to be Dov Zviely from Haifa University, a hydrographer from there, who's going to be switching the emphasis slightly to talk about using historical nautical charts, maps and aerial photos for studying coastal morphology processes.
Hello everybody. It's okay. Okay. I will give a short presentation on the coastal morphology. Actually, I think the most important thing today concerning the coastal morphology is the problem of coastal erosion. It's a wide-word problem, and it's a fact also the Israeli coast. You can see here in England, East England, this coast eroded about 2 meters per year. It's a lot. It means that in less than a century, all the residence area behind will collapse. And I think it's a good opportunity to show you through the maps, through maybe historical maps and aerial photograph, what we are doing here in Israel, and get some ideas towards this issue. So the Israeli coast, familiar for you, it's about 190 kilometers from Gaza Strip towards Rosh Hanikra. Two main characteristics. One, the coast and the shelf, it's very shallow and smooth. And it's a high energy coast. It means we have strong waves, currents that moves the sand along the coast. Just for example, in the last 10 years, the Israeli coast hit by 3 major storms. You see the storms were maximum above 12 meters. It's not regular in the Mediterranean, but along the Israeli coast, it's happened many times during the last century. If you're comparing these parameters to the Aegean Sea, even to Egypt, you will see that the coast of Israel, it's directly impacted by very strong forces. Now, during the storms, the coast affecting flooding, the impact is on coastal constructions and also on the toe of the cliffs. The cliffs along the Israeli coast are very soft, meaning of geotechnical. Does mean that whenever strong wave hit the cliff, there is a good chance that large portion will collapse. And today the government trying to do the best to eliminate this problem, but it's a new project. It will cost at least the first stage $500 million shekels, and well, we will see to where the government is leading. the coast of Israel has many marine constructions that built during the last decades. One of the famous construction is the marina at Herzliya. It's a modern marina built between the end of 90 and 92. And after the marina was constructed, a massive erosion developed north of the marina. And we used aerial photograph, simple methodology based on GIS and Intergraph and Bentley products to monitor how much the shoreline retreat during the last 20 years. Only in the first few years after the construction, you can see that the marina retreat at least, the coastline retreat at least 50% backwards. You can see the shore, how it was wide during 56. Today it's covering regularly during the winter time. And this phenomena is very, let's say, it's popular, and it's a big issue now in our country. In places where the cliff, actually cliffs, the cliffs in Israel are sand dunes and they are poorly cemented by calcium carbonate. In many places, the cliffs hiding antiques, and occasionally, after the collapse, you can see very interesting finds, like this one here in Ashkelon, that found only, I think, 2 years ago, after the strong storm of December 2010. And we are going to lose them because, for the moment, the government didn't start to work on the project to protect the finds. From the other hand, the cliff is very fragile, very soft, and there's no way back. Bet Yanai is a village area south of Hadera, between Hadera and Netanya, central Israel. The same problem, and you can see the residence area behind, how close it's to the edge of the cliff. And it's another example. Oh, sure. We checked the retreat of the coastal edge during the last century. Our calculation lead us that the cliff retreat at least, let's say, around 20 meters in the last century. It means 20 centimeters per year on average, all the coastal cliff of Israel. So from the one hand, it's a nice contribution for the sediments, because 70%, maybe 80% of the cliff composed of quartz sand. However, you can see the buildings here, and they are in dangerous and big problem. And the government, it's stuck now in position. From the one hand, she doesn't want to pay the people to move them from the the houses. From the other hand, the people will not move, and they're trying to put along the cliff base any kind of protection. I think the most important area from a morphological point of view along the Israeli coast is Haifa Bay. Haifa Bay, bordered by the Carmel Headland in the south and Akko Headland in the north. It's the only bay from in the Nile littoral cell, actually 660 kilometers from Alexandria, actually Abu Qir Bay, towards the Israeli coast. This is the only bay in the southeast Mediterranean. And all the coast here from the Nile Delta along the northern Sinai towards Haifa Bay are composed of Nile drive sand, quartz sand. It's very fine sand. And we are considering all this area from the coast until 30-meter depth as a littoral cell. Actually, this is the largest cell in the world, and a lot of research and are doing in this area because along the coast you'll find millions of people, and it's a very sensitive area. The Nile littoral cell, in the Nile littoral cell, the generators are waves that are approaching from northwest or from west direction and producing a longshore sediment transport until Haifa Bay, the terminal sink of the sand are transported to the Mediterranean by the Nile River. Let's go back to maps and charts, because that was the reason why I'm here today. The first maps, I call them figures, but let's say maps is also okay, because map for me it's something accurate. It's my vision. It's coming from a geodetic point of view, not just general description. But the first that you can see somehow the coastline, more realistic coastline, the ones of the Italians Maria Sonudo and Paolino Veneto. After that, we have the map of, actually it's chart. And I will explain immediately what are the difference between map and chart, because chart are for mariners, for navigators, at sea, and map are for topography and people in the land. And the focus of these two methodologies are much different. So the second one is Admiral Piraz, the Turkish admiral, hydrographer actually. And you can see here Haifa Bay. Here is Tzor, yes, Tyre, and Caesarea is here. But this is the first hydrographic chart. You can see in the water obstruction that are very important for navigators, and the compass also. So this is very important chart, and there is a pretty large series of these charts. Afterwards, at the end of the middle to the end of the 18th century, you can see the series of the French hydrographer, Roux and Berlin. I think I found them here in the collection here, and the library here. And at that time, you can find many, I call them anchorage figures, because the purpose is especially for anchoring, for anchoring the ship. And you can find for the first time the anchors that point you where you can anchor the ship, depths, okay, and coastline with few geographical morphological features, not more than that, the compass, and of course text of the site. From geodetic point of view, the first map that we extract the coastline and we could use it for measuring the shoreline position is the one of Colonel Jacotin that was measured in 1799. Actually, only 2/3 of the area in Haifa Bay is accurate. All the other parts, especially the Kishon and the Carmel coast and the North Galilee or the Galilee coast, are not accurate. But this is the first map that we use. You can see that in simultaneously, in the same time when Jacotin and the French using geodetic map, high accuracy measurements, at sea, the Admiralty using the same plans that used or produced by the French more than 50 years ago. So from geodetic point of view, the hydrographer was still back at least a couple of years until they matched the level of accuracy of the land surveyors. The first hydrographic chart in Haifa Bay is the one of John Island, master of the Madagascar. This chart was part of three, one of Sur, one of Sidon and Haifa. K Kafia, we thought that K Kafia, it's not Haifa, it's Kafia, from the Kafia maybe. But for the first time, we have coastline, and that we can compare it to the present one. The second one was the chart of George Biddlecombe, Master Biddlecombe, and 41. And in 1844, this chart that I brought it from the UKHO in Taunton, it's a compilation of two charts. The top of the chart was surveyed by Biddlecombe, the lower part by Dillon, and the cartographer at the hydrographic office in London made one map and sold them in 44. The most famous, I think, chart in Haifa Bay, it's chart 1585 of Commander Arthur Lucas Mansell and his crew that survey the coast of Israel, very accurate, and high standards, with the HMS Firefly. And that map gave us very accurate and nice reference to the position of the coastline, the mid of the 19th century. Okay, and this is another chart of the same crew. Concerning the PAF, I have one remark. The coastline of the PAF brought to Palestine from the British Admiralty. It's not original. The PAF did not survey correctly the coastline. They took it, they copied it, and what they surveyed is the inland only. Okay, Haifa Bay, how it looks at the beginning of the 20th century. At the beginning of the 20th century, the port of Haifa were constructed, and right after that, Captain Joe Edgell and his crew from the Endeavour surveyed all the coast of Israel, including Jaffa. This is the last time that non-Israeli fleet surveyed our coast, and we have the chart here. This is the fare sheet of Haifa. We have the same in Jaffa. Actually, this is what I meant, fare sheet. And if interesting about the position of the coast and what happened, you can see easily here. This is the sheets here. First here, Haifa Bay. The coastline was here, and after the construction of the port, all this area were filled and dried. In the eastern part of the bay, you can see that until the construction of the port, the coastline were progressing westward, and since the port was constructed, the bay freezed. No sand continued to move eastward. All the sand stuck along the main breakwater, and since then, you can see that all the coastline here remain the same position. So that's the coastline in Mansell, 1862. If you're looking northward, you can see the coastline from Jacoten, Mansell, and then after the construction of Haifa Bay, Haifa Port, freeze, and until today remain the same. More than, let's say, more than 80 years, everything remained the same. Thank you very much.
Final speaker today. This afternoon session, anyway, this session. It's going to be David Bodenhamer again, talking about complex visualizations and deep maps.
Well, it's good to be before you again, even though it is mid-afternoon and my energy is lagging, but I hope you can bear with me. It is very informative and somewhat intimidating to listen to such expert speakers talking about things that I have only the dimmest knowledge of. It reminds me that the American humorist Will Rogers once said something that I take great comfort in, and that is that we all are ignorant, just in different subjects. So I was talking to a group in California before the Christmas holidays, and a group of spatial cognitive psychologists. They were engaged in spatial thinking, and I was talking to them way outside of my knowledge range, and I told them how intimidating it was, and afterwards one of the psychologists came up and said, well, we have a name for that. And I said, what is that? And she says it's called the oh shit syndrome. All right. So I want to talk about complex visualizations and deep maps, and I want to use the focus of American religion as a way of kind of encapsulating what it is that we as a center are doing to enhance GIS for historical research, and then take you into something I mentioned this morning briefly, and that is deep mapping, which is another of our interests that actually has stemmed from this particular project that we've been engaged in. You may be aware, or you may not be aware, that there has been a long-standing interest in the spatial patterns of American religious practice and adherence. And this goes all the way back actually to the early part of the 20th century, but it becomes focused especially on the concept of mapping with a book called The Historical Atlas of American Religion, published by Edward Gausted in the 1960s. Now, to be sure, there's a lot of competition among religious bodies in the United States, so to be able to show that your religious preference is dominant in a particular region seems to be important, and kind of carving out a market share for yourself. But scholars seized on this as a way of trying to understand regional variation. And they relied upon several different data sets in pulling this information together. And first of all, the U.S. Bureau of the Census would survey this, would gather this information as they did in 1890 and then in 1906, 16, 26, and 36, until finally someone pointed out that the practice of the U.S. government in collecting information about religious practices was unconstitutional, and the government should not be doing that, so they stopped. And then in 1952, the National Council of Churches picked up the practice, and then from 1960 on, the Glenmary Research Center in Atlanta, Georgia, has been surveying congregational or denominational statisticians to get from them records of or counts of membership by spatial units, especially at the county level. And what we have to work with is really quantitative data that it's all numeric data on denominational members, denominational adherents, the number of congregations, the value of property, and some programmatic information about what these various religious bodies do. And typically the results will be something like this. It's a map of the religious geography of the United States. And for those of you who are familiar with the U.S., it's not at all surprising to you to see that the American South, where I'm from, as you probably can tell by my accent, is heavily dominated by Southern Baptist. In fact, virtually every county there is the dominant religious denomination is Southern Baptist. The Intermountain West is more heavily Mormon. This is where Mitt Romney comes from. His family comes from, Utah. And then you find, if you look more carefully at this map, you would notice that in the Northeast and in California especially, you find heavy pockets, and in fact all of the major metropolitan areas, heavy pockets of Catholicism. So we first began to gather this information as a project of the Electronic Cultural Atlas Initiative, and we moved this information to the web. It was the first time this has been done. We did this in 2001. Calling it the North American Religion Atlas, and you can see by the images there that it's rather a dated conception of religion. But this was a standard web GIS sort of product where scholars could go in and could select various denominational groups that they wanted to look at. These were normalized, so they could then map them interactively. They could look at denominational dominance in particular different ways. And we recognized that that was a rather limited way to do things. So within our home county of Marion County in Indiana, we had another separate project about religious adherence, and we began to think about other ways in which we could enrich the history of and the understanding of the spatial dimensions of religion. So these represent all the 1,200 congregations in Marion County, which we could then place against the census geography, and in this instance we could even place membership against that census geography to understand, and here from one of the most prominent churches in our area, we could understand where the membership came from, what kind of socioeconomic units they came from. We couldn't tell much about their individual things, but we could tell where they lived, for instance. We could also look at kind of multiracial congregations. We could do a number of different things with census information, church location information, and religious adherence information to give us a better understanding of the way religious belief expressed itself in our area. And so with these kinds of things, we found that we had a certain number of successes. That is, we had a publicly available, comprehensive, interactive means to chart religion data across time and at various scales. The North American Religion Atlas was used widely in American university courses. We would know this because when the website would break down, we would get these frantic calls from professors saying, my students have an assignment due, you have to get this back up. And then we served as the data and mapping analysis engine of a major publication series known as Religion by Region in the U.S. from 2005 to 2008. But there were some real problems with this. One is there was no easy way to construct and trace denominational families across time. Now, you may or may not be familiar with the religious geography or religious adherence practices in the U.S., but there are well over 800 denominations in the United States. Well, you can't manage 800 denominations in a mapping engine. So you begin to think about grouping them into families, and they're typically, it depends upon the scholar, a scholar may group them into anywhere from 8 to 10 or 12 different families. But the problem is that these family groupings change repeatedly. America is a religion marketplace, and you'll find that people are continually changing not simply their denominational preferences, but certain denominations or sub-branches of those denominations are disappearing, or they're coming into existence, and they're merging, they're splitting. All of these things are happening year in and year out. So how do you manage that across time? And then we found also that there were some simplistic visualizations. What you noticed here is simply choropleth mapping. Ian talked about that this morning. It's the dominant way in which GIS maps data from administrative units such as counties, and all it will show you then is the dominant denomination for the county. And it doesn't say anything about the other religious bodies that exist in that particular geographic unit. So the real question we became interested in is how, since we know that humanists are interested in complexity and that the GIS default is the choropleth map, which simplifies and misrepresents these social phenomena, then how can we enhance the technology to reveal the socio-political and cultural complexities inherent in any geographic unit? And we received a grant from the National Endowment for the Humanities, a research grant to allow us to do that. We call the project New Tools for the Spatial Humanities, Visualizing Complex Spatial Data. And you can see some of our aims here in this project. It was to re-engineer this North American Religion Atlas and to incorporate new ways of visualizing this, to give develop a tool to facilitate on-the-fly recategorization and aggregation of data, especially about these various religious groupings that people wanted to map, and then to build a stronger theoretical and conceptual case for a spatial approach to the humanities. So those are very ambitious goals, and I can just tell you now we're not going to reach all of them by the end of the project. These were kind of our user requirements, which matched those goals. And while we've done most of this, and we will continue to work on this, we haven't gotten completely yet to the user-defined geographies for this. But it's the visualization that I want to talk about, because our goals here were to view the range and relative size of denominational types within the same geography or across geographies, and then to allow these visualizations to be ordered by measures of relative proximity and distance, and then allow us to compare multiple geographies. And so one of the things we've done is renamed the atlas. We had called it initially the North American Religion Atlas, and it occurred to us that we didn't have anything from Canada or anything from Mexico, and we probably therefore ought to just simply rename it the Digital Atlas of American Religion. And this is our new look. No, it's not in Latin, as that suggests, but this was just simply the initial mock-up of it. But here's some of the things that we've done. Some of it will look quite familiar to those of you who know GIS well, and then some of it I think you'll see is really an advance on what GIS can do for the humanist. We're able to map the dominant religious families simply by allowing you to make a choice on the left-hand side, and to see that by time, and to see that across the entire United States, in this instance by state. You can see on in the legend over there, we've given not simply letting you know the representation, what the representation of the color is, but we've also given you the national ranks so that you can tell that Catholics constitute 22% of the nation's adhering population, and that's clearly not going to be the case in the South, where the Southern Baptists are dominant. We've allowed you to choose from multiple years simply by a time slider at the top, and also to go through and to choose since the first mapping that you saw was only the dominant denominational presence, now you can see by using the slider bar on the right there, the second, third, fourth, and so on through the 9 largest denominational families that exist in the U.S. We've allowed you to do this by going into the states and looking at the county geographies, to hover over a state to get its exact value for the dominant presence, to look at predominant families by county for the entire nation, and again by hovering over that to call up the data that lies behind that. But again, this is all pretty standard in GIS terms. But what we have done is we've also begun to construct some religious typologies from the data to make it a little bit easier for you to understand what these categorizations mean. For instance, the data help us to understand something about questions of central authority. All religious bodies are organized either around a central authority or they are operating in a more decentralized fashion. And so what we have done is we have collected and ranked all of that. We've done the same thing with giving and educational and periodical publication. These are some of the programmatic information that's been reported. Periodical publication is going to become meaningless in the next iteration because most denominations are leaving periodicals and moving to the web, and we're not quite sure how we'll capture that. We've also allowed the user to adjust the legend break. So if you don't like the legends that are provided automatically by the software, you can go in and adjust the legends to anything that you want. If you want to see quintiles or deciles or however you'd like to see that. We give you the statewide values for specific denominations. And we provide a gradient fill. You can see that checked up there. And this is California, which is, if you were to look at it, you would see only 2 counties are non-Catholic in the dominance. But by giving a gradient fill, by breaking the dominant into 5 different ranks, you're able to see that some counties are much more heavily Catholic than other counties. So you're beginning to get a sense then that there is greater complexity or diversity within those counties that are less Catholic than in those that are more Catholic. But of course that still doesn't, and of course then we add the ability to look at some of this with U.S. Census data. For instance, here we're looking at foreign-born population that constitutes greater than 10% of the population matched against the Catholic report. And you'll see that, of course, California, Florida, New York, and are the 3 states that pop out as those that have that amount of Hispanic population, so that you can tell that some of the Catholic dominance is caused by the Hispanic population. You can do other standard things such as save and print your map and view data in a table. But then we realized that what we still had not done is moved into a really complex visualization. So we knew that we could not do that with standard GIS. We knew that we were going to have to do something else. And so what we've done is we've created other visualization means. This is still spatial, but it's not spatial as in a map, in a traditional map or a cartographic map. This is a tree map. It simply shows the proportion of, for any particular geographic area, in this instance, it's my state of Indiana, and it lets you see right away that in Indiana, Catholic and Orthodox constitute a larger percentage of the population than Baptist and then Christian. And you can break down, these are only the family groupings. You could hover over these and you can begin to get the entire religious configuration of the Baptist, for instance, or the Christian and Restorationist within this. So these tree maps are very important in helping you to see something immediately about the religious complexity that exists. And just to give you an example of why this matters, in Marion County, Indiana, where my institution is, there are over 100 different denominations. Over 100 different denominations. Catholic is the most dominant, but it's only 18% of the population, or the adhering population. So if you look at this chloropleth map, you see that Marion County is a dominant Catholic county. But at 18% of the adhering population, which is itself only half of the total population, then you see it's a relatively small percentage. In Los Angeles, where we work with a companion center, the Center for Religion and Civic Culture at the University of Southern California, there are over 600 religious groups, 600 religious denominations. And so only a tree map allows you to get at that kind of complexity. The other thing that we've done, of course, is add cardiograms to the mix. Cardigram is a way of distorting the geography to more accurately represent the proportionality of the thing. And of course, here you see a standard GIS mapping on the left and a cartogram on the right, so that you begin to understand about how the dominance works when you distort the geography. We've also added motion charts to this, and a motion chart allows you to look at a couple of variables at one time and to see how those change over time. Here we have adherence on the left, adherence of all, as a percentage of all adherents, and then across the bottom, adherence as a percentage of the total state population. And you can set this in motion. This is a Google tool, and you can actually watch this change over time. So it begins to give you a real sense of the dynamic quality of religious adherence. And then we've also now beginning to add exploratory spatial data analysis engine to this. Now this allows you to look at the data in a typical statistical way and then to find the spatial reference for it. This is coming from a different project, but it's the same thing that we're beginning to implement. On the right, that you'll notice that there's simply a scatter plot, and we're able to tell here from this scatter plot where this is occurring spatially. so that you could do a bounding box around any particular point of the scatter plot and see whether or not there's a pattern that exists in space. And this is a very important tool for exploring the data dynamically and beginning to see whether or not spatial patterns have any meaning in this. Well, these are some of the things we're doing to enhance the visualization characteristics of GIS. And we're actually borrowing from a number of different well-developed technologies and simply linking them to GIS so that when the map changes in a traditional GIS form, it's also changing the other representations. You're not having to recreate that. You're able to see the same data reflected in 3 or 4 or 5 and ultimately a number of other different ways. But even that's not enough for us, because while this gives us a sense of what we can do with quantitative data, it doesn't tell us how we manage the other kind of data about religious practice and religious belief and religious adherence that we know exists there. How do we deal with, say, a person's confessional experience? How do we deal with ritualistic practice? How do we deal with images, religious images? All of these are influencing our understanding of space. They're representations of space, but they don't appear in a GIS. How do we get that? How do we make this part of our map? And another NEH project has allowed us then to begin to think about what is deep mapping, and how out of deep mapping can we begin to construct the spatial narratives around which we build our arguments as scholars, around which we understand the world itself. How do we create, out of this information and out of these technologies, spatial stories that allow us to communicate with each other as scholars and with each other as citizens? So these are our goals in this project, and this project has just begun. In fact, we began this summer as we had 12 scholars, 5 from Europe and 7 from North America, that met in Indianapolis for an institute, a summer institute that we put on. Ian was one of our guest lecturers for that. And what we have done is we've used this as a way of pulling together geographers and humanities scholars and computing scientists to think with us about how we create a deep map and how we can build a prototype that tests whether or not deep map has meaning for a humanist. Now, a deep map is, it's becoming clearer to me. I've used the term because I think it's actually an attractive marketing term. Everybody seems to resonate with the notion of a deep map. We seem to bring our own images to it. But in fact, I think there is something about a deep map that is compelling, and that is that it is not restricted to quantitative data. It includes all the data that we use, all the evidence that we use as humanists in our work. So it is, by definition, a multimedia and multi-layered map. It embodies, in its very essence, multiple perspectives. And it is open to negotiation. In this sense, it's a very postmodern device. That is, the design of the deep map is to create ambiguity and complexity. It's designed to prompt questions, to allow us to build hypotheses. It's not designed to settle arguments. In fact, in some ways, it is designed to be subversive of certainty. It is going to be a visual and immersive medium, and one in which we frame it as a conversation, an open structure in which we can contribute endlessly, but we don't have to wait endlessly to be able to pull something out of it. And in our schematic, this is the way it looks. It's kind of, as you see here, a geospatial web integrator, and you'll notice that GIS is only one part of that integrator. We're also talking about self-organizing maps, tree maps, animations, game engines, tag clouds, a whole variety of other tools that are already available to us in the digital world that becomes part of this integrator structure that is connected to a spatial storyboard and a narrative tracker that allows us then ultimately to take that, to construct spatial stories out of it, to push it into a display medium, and ultimately I think the real goal is to immerse the user and to allow us to become immersed in the story, much as Charles Dickens in the 19th century, through the construction of his narratives, could immerse us in his world, a world that we still can access today. So that's the goal. Now, I admit that's quite ambitious. But the way we're thinking about it and the way we're actually constructing it at this point is to think about something that Apple has taught us and that Google Play has taught us, and that is that we've become very accustomed now to the notion of apps, of applications that do specific things. So we're thinking about how it is that we construct a humanities toolkit that we call an app store. That if what you want to do is to move text into this environment, you know that you've got to tag the text in some way. You may have to use natural language processing, as Ian is doing, but we want to make this just as simple for the humanities scholar as possible. Their concern is the text. It's not the conversion of the text to get it into the medium. So our goal is to simplify that process as much as we possibly can, so that the real emphasis for the humanities scholar can be on identifying the right text and then working with it to construct meaning, not on making the conversion itself, which is actually a highly technical process, but for which now a number of tools exist. This is the way in which we're beginning to think about this in terms of wireframing it, and right now I'm thinking more that it's not so much a traditional website, although we have wireframed it in that fashion, but it really is, it acts more like a tablet device. In fact, I'm pretty sure that we're trying to think about designing this for 5 years out. I'm pretty sure we're all going to be dealing with touchscreens. We're not going to be dealing with mouses. I mean, it's pretty clear that this is where the computing world is going. So how do we do this? Well, we want to make sure that in the ways we think about it, obviously we have to have a search capability, and we have to search by chronology and topics and geography. And this next box down here is simply the way in which we have maybe text is tagged, and we have a tag cloud there. That tag cloud tells us something about the data that is already in this environment, or this data that we're putting into the environment. It could be either one of those. We understand something that Greek Orthodox, for instance, that this is popping up a lot, that it's the dominant, one of the dominant topics in this particular. It's similar in some say to topic modeling. And topic modeling would be one of the tools. You've got a visualization component there, so that as this visualization, this is, although it's a Methodist church, not a Greek Orthodox church, it's being shown there, but that as you begin, as the tag cloud reveals something, the visualization changes. It's all linked together. That you have a narrative box in which you're actually working with the evidence that you have with this environment to figure out how to pull it together and to construct your narrative. And you're tracking your narrative, because the issue is that we want multiple users to be in this environment at once. But I want to see how you're tracking your narrative, and I want to see what I'm doing with that same evidence. This is the way we have a conversation about it within that framework. We can use other tools like motion charts and some of the things that we're doing. So what we're doing here is really trying to build this new spatial collaboratory that I mentioned this morning. It's something in which we can add information. Now, the purpose for all of this, besides those that I've mentioned, is to allow us to always remember that the evidence and the actions that we see in our documents, that we see in our visual images and all, they all take place somewhere. It reminds us that space has to be an important consideration, that the evidence from one place differs from the evidence from another, even though it may be exactly the same evidence, because they're coming from different places. They're representing different sets of historical experiences. And that's what we want to continually keep reminding us. Now, as a humanist, I know that when I go into the archives and I do my work, and I'm a constitutional and legal scholar, I may be reading a court case, and it's easy for me to forget that that court case comes from someplace. That judicial decision is written by a scholar who was born in this place, educated in this place, and now resides here. All of that is influencing him, but I easily forget that because I deal with the words. And what we're trying to do is to keep us forever in touch with the importance that space plays in our lives. And so the deep map then is designed to do that, but it's also designed to allow us, in thinking about space, to begin to ask questions that we would not ask otherwise, to frame hypotheses that we can test and that continues to keep the evidence and the knowledge that we're creating alive and dynamic for us. Thank you.